All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me again on Thirsty Thursday. This is our third tasting on Thursdays through this shelter in place. I hope you're all hanging in there. I know it's been sort of a long journey, and I hope that our little Thursday wine meditations have helped a little bit. So that's what I'm calling this now, Thirsty Thursday meditation. We're in a very peaceful place today. I am in Chimney Rock's original barrel room, so I actually learned to drive a forklift in this room. Very special memory for me. And this is where all of Chimney Rock's wines used to be aged when it was first founded. When the Trelados built a new facility, we have a new production building just across the way. So, tell you a little bit about our tasting today. It's super, super special. We're going to be tasting two of our most beloved single vineyards here at Chimney Rock, Ganymede and Tomahawk. You're going to learn everything there is to know about these two single vineyards, and I think of them very much as the yin and yang of our estate. And I think you'll understand a little bit clearer as we get to it. So I think in order to understand where the vineyards are and why they're different, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the estate again. Some of you guys have been here and you know the story. Some of you perhaps haven't. So we've got 105 planted acres here in Stag's Leap District, and Chimney Rock's kind of nestled at the base of the Vaca Mountains. The Palisades are to our north, so there's these massive rocky outcroppings to our north. We're at the very south end of the Napa Valley, so we get really beautiful cooling breezes from the San Pablo Bay. And here at Chimney Rock, we've got about 26 different blocks or separate sub-vineyards that are planted to different things. So 18 of those are planted to Cabernet. Ganymede is at the very north end of the estate, so it's closer to the Palisades. And what does that mean? The Palisades, this massive rocky outcropping, actually traps heat during the day. And that has an effect on sort of the ripeness of tannins. So the tannins in Cabernet can be very sort of elegant and lush and silky the warmer it is. Tomahawk, by contrast, is at the very south end of the estate. And it's about a half-mile walk. And it's remarkable how much different the subclimate sort of is going north to south. And it shows in the wines, which is what we're going to see. So a little bit about Ganymede. Why is it named Ganymede? That's a great story. So on the side of the building that I'm standing in today, on the side that faces our courtyard, there's a massive frieze of Ganymede, who's a mortal kidnapped by Zeus, to pour wine for all the gods of Mount Olympus in Greek mythology. And this building is actually inspired by a really old winery in South Africa called Brut Constantia, which was built in the 1600s. And that frieze is actually a duplicate of a frieze at Constantia. It was done by a California artist named Michael Casey. And so when it came time to name some of our oldest vines on the property, it seemed rather appropriate that Ganymede was the only name they could have. And so if you've been to the winery, the big block that's right behind the tasting room, the vines are massive and gnarly and older. They were planted in 92, 93, so they're close to 30 years old. And I think that much like people and wines, vines get better with age. And Ganymede very much tells that tale. I'll tell you a little bit about Tomahawk, and then what we're going to do is we're going to taste. And then I'll have some time to tell you guys a little bit about the 2013 vintage, which is what we're tasting today. Some of you may be tasting other vintages as well, but these wines are very consistent in what they do from year to year, especially in their relationship to each other. And I find often, I'm going to take a poll at the end of the day, who loves Ganymede more, who loves Tomahawk more? I love them both equally. They're both my children, but I really am curious to see what you guys think. So Tomahawk is at the very south end of our state. It was named sort of in honor of the Waco Indians who preceded us on this land. So they used to hunt from the hills above, and we actually found some artifacts on the property, and we thought it was good karma to probably name a couple of blocks in their honor. So we have a block named Arrowhead Cabernet, and we have a Tomahawk Cabernet. And Tomahawk is interesting. It was planted when the Terlados invested into the property in 2002. So it's an 18-year-old vineyard, but it was a very, it was like a child prodigy vineyard. So literally by the fourth leaf, the fourth year that we had grown these vines, it produced amazing fruit. And we thought it was remarkable for such young vines to produce this great fruit. And it was that year that we made our first single vineyard of Tomahawk, 2006. So very different sites. Soils are sort of similar, but there's a little bit more gravelly loam on the south end of the estate, a little bit of sandstone, and a higher percentage of rock, whereas the north end is a little bit more bale, clay, loam soils. Anyway, with that, let's taste. I think we'll go north to south. So let's start with the 2013 Ganymede. This is the meditation moment. Take a deep breath. Don't think about anything except for what you smell in that glass. And that is classic Ganymede. It's just this beautiful blackberry, black cherry, dark fruit, which is very typical of the north end of the estate. A little bit of cocoa, very elegant, very graceful. And on the palate, that's it. It's silky, super smooth, a lot of finesse, a lot of polish, just very, very graceful Cabernet. Now, we're going to go to Tomahawk. Extreme contrast here. So let's smell first. And immediately I'm struck by the character of the fruit and how different it is. This to me is black fruit, black cherry, blackberry, sort of black currant. This goes into sort of the red fruit family, so more cherry, some dried cherry, maybe some plums. But what you get when you get to the cooler side of the property is you start to get a little bit more savory and sort of maybe a little bit of dried herbs, some dried sage, not as subtle. You know, Ganymede has a lot of subtlety. Tomahawk is sort of like, I'm here, hear me roar kind of a thing. Really a little bit more rustic almost. And on the palate, I would say exactly the same thing. Tannins are bigger, broader, a little bit more, oh my God, I need a piece of steak immediately, right? Just very chewy Cabernet. I like the term rustic for it. I think of it as they're both power cabs, but in very different styles. And the interesting thing that I think is important to point out is I make these wines pretty much the same way. So they're vinified the same way. It really is a difference in the vineyard. We're telling the tale of the vineyard, and that's the distinction that you see here. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about vintage 13, which we haven't talked about. I was looking through my notes earlier, and 13 was another lazy winemaker vintage. So if you guys have seen me talk about different vintages, if you haven't tuned into these before, I like to say that lazy winemaker years are where Mother Nature does all the work for you, and we don't have to do a whole lot in the vineyards to get great fruit. So they tend to be drier years, less rain, vines are stressed, small berries, lots of concentration. The harder working years are years where there's a lot of rain and we have to do more canopy management, and berry size is larger, so we might have to do some tricks in the cellar to get better concentration. So that's kind of the difference. Now, I will tell you the truth. There is not a lazy winemaker out there. This is not a career you can get into and be lazy, just so you know. But it's just a metaphor for me. Anyway, so 13 was the first of 3 drought years that we had sequentially here in Napa. 12 had been a pretty normal year. 13, super dry. No spring rain at all, so the soil moisture was down pretty soon. Probably one of the earliest vintages that I had in my time here. So I think we started in August that year, and we were done by early October with all of the fruit on the estate. So that's really rare. Typically, Cabernet Merlot starts in September. We start Cab early October. We finish late October. But this particular vintage, we were done with all of the Cabernet by October 4th. And I think what's also really interesting, people often ask me, what's your favorite vintage? And I go through different relationships with vintages on like when they're being made. I'm always in love with them, always. Like it's always beautiful in tank and in barrel. And I think my most difficult point with vintages is when they're first released. And I think it's almost like, having stage fright for your kid when they go up on stage. When a wine's released, or just you've got performance anxiety, what will it be like? And the 13s, they are such power wines, and they had a lot more tannin, I would say, even than we normally get here at Stag's Leap. Our wines tend to be fairly elegant, but the 13s were really kind of strong tannin backbone, lots of power. And it took me a little while to get comfortable with that. But my relationship with this vintage now has changed completely, because right now, these wines are just starting to sing. And I hope that you guys are finding this as well. And hopefully some of you guys have had the 13s earlier when they were kind of still beasts. And they're kind of beasts still, but they're starting to kind of hit their stride and really start to sing. Again, my favorite time in a Cabernet's life to drink is probably anywhere from 5 to, I would say, 10 to 12 years. And so this is at that magical point, and I think these wines are showing really, really well. So I think, do we have any questions so far?
Mm-hmm. I think you just answered Kurt's, which is on aging wines in general. And you have a question from Wesley on your recommendation for decanting them.
Yeah. The 13s are actually a good candidate for decanting. Although I also think of when you pour a wine in your glass, you're basically decanting. It's sitting there, it's aerating like it would in a decanter. So I would tend to decant younger wines more than I would older. I feel like older wines can be a little bit more fragile. Now this is only a 7-year-old cab, so I think decanting is perfectly appropriate. And I might do it maybe like an hour before I serve it or so. I also kind of like the 13s when they were younger. I would often double decant, so go into a decanter and go back into the bottle, just so it got a little extra air because the tannins are tight. With older wines, anything that's older than 15, I just sit the bottle up a couple of days before I consume, let the sediment settle, and pour out of the bottle. And I feel that decanting in the glass is actually better, just because the wines tend to be more fragile once they're a little older. So.
Similar question, Jordan wants to know how long to hold on to the 2010 Ganny.
2010 Ganny. That's got quite a bit of life in it still. I mean, I had it recently, so it's a 10-year-old. You could go another 10 years, but again, I'll go back to my traditional response to this question. When you drink your wines is truly a personal question. Never let anybody tell you, when you should drink wine. My favorite homework to assign to people that I educate on wine is buy a case of your favorite cab. So this is a 12-year assignment. And every year, you're going to drink that same bottle with the same group of friends. And you're going to take notes. And you're going to decide who prefers what at what stage. And I think inevitably, you're going to find that somebody loves it at 5 years, somebody loves it at 8, somebody loves it at 2, and that it really is a personal So, I think if you love fruit-forward wines, drink them younger. If you love kind of the subtlety of a 15-year-old wine when it's starting to get those secondary aromatics and kind of the super silky tannins, then, save them for 15 years. I'm not a very patient collector. I tend to be a little too curious. But I think, it is always worth aging some Cabernets for the long haul and seeing what they're like with 20 years and even 25. And as recently as a few weeks ago, with some of my colleagues here at Chimney Rock, we tried the 1984 and 1985, the first vintages of Chimney Rock made, and they were still alive and beautiful. So kind of remarkable.
It looks like there's another Diana online.
Oh, yeah.
Is online. It says hi from Sao Paulo.
Oh, excellent. Sao Paulo's in the house. It's awesome.
And then a question from Travis and Rich that are similar. Travis has the 13, 14, and 15 of both wines, and is interested if you have a favorite vintage of that set. And then Rich has a 2011 versus a 2013.
Okay, so 13, 14, 15 against each other. Those are just knockout vintages. I would say 13 is your vintage if you love super powerful cabs. Like they were muscular, they were powerful. 14 was a little bit more elegant, dialed back, but a lot of concentration, but very layered. And 15 to me in some ways was the prettiest of the vintages. It had really, really beautiful pure fruit. Not quite as muscly as the 13, not quite as layered as the 14. I love all three of those vintages. I mean, you can't go wrong there. 11 and 13, I love that contrast because that's almost like you're contrasting Bordeaux and Napa, right? 11 was a super cool year. I like to say that 11 was what Napa Valley did with Bordeaux bad weather. Napa Valley is beautiful with Bordeaux bad weather because we made great wines that vintage, but they were very different from a vintage like 13, which was super warm and dry. So I would say, does he have them both open? I'm curious, because the 11 definitely has more herbal, it's a little bit more lean and austere, and the 13 is this sort of like plush and, big, juicy, jammy cab. So fun vintages to juxtapose, though.
Yeah. Question from Meg. It's been very hot in Napa this week. How will that weather impact the upcoming vintage?
Yeah, at this point we are okay with heat. Things are pre-bloom, so which means we haven't flowered yet. We're still in the stages of suckering, and heat right now will actually slow down vigor a little bit, which is not a bad thing. So the vines are fine. There's still probably some water in the soil from the winter. End spring, we had some late spring rains as well, so not concerned about it. And probably a couple of weeks we'll start to flower, and at that point we really like the weather to be kind of even keeled, so not too warm, not too cold, not too windy, not rainy. That'll be a slightly more sensitive period, but for now this heat is okay. It's beautiful. Yeah, we're just enjoying it. We did mow a lot of our cover crops because the vines are needing the moisture in the ground, so we want to take away the competition a little bit sooner than we would in a wet year. So, great question, though.
Mm-hmm. Kurt is asking if powerful vintages age more slowly in comparison to...
Making wines for over 20 years, I don't know that I could say that there's a predictability to how they age. Wines have often surprised me because some vintages that are subtle and elegant, like 2000, 2003, have shocked me in their ability to age. And they've lived a long time, and I didn't expect that because I thought they were kind of delicate. Kurt, I have to say, I think you have to evaluate vintage by vintage and watch them. I think it's hard to say. I mean, I think it's safe to say that wines that have more tannin tend to live a little bit longer because that's sort of the backbone for the wine. But I've also seen that not be true. So I think when it comes to wine, sometimes no rules apply, and it draws that point, which is every vintage is so different from each other. Like no set of circumstances ever repeats itself. Therefore, the same is true, I think, in aging. And so you have to watch vintage by vintage.
Mm-hmm. A question from Janine on food pairings. What would you recommend to eat with tomahawk there, pairing it with tomahawk steak?
Yeah, I love that we've done quite a few wine dinners with a tomahawk in-bone steak, and I think that's phenomenal. Again, it's got like powerful tannin, so I think a fattier cut of meat, if meat is your thing, so like something like a ribeye or a tomahawk steak. Ganymede, if you wanted to pair that, I would maybe go with something a little bit more delicate. It could be like a filet, or if you didn't want to do meat, like sort of a mushroom risotto or something like that would be great with that.
Awesome. Marisa is asking if you use the same barrels for each of the wines respectively.
No, actually, yeah. So that's the one thing that, over time, as we get to know these single vineyards, and we've been doing them now for more than a decade, we've been fine-tuning what the barrel program is for each. And I think they each require different things. So Ganymede actually gets 100% new oak, and I use, there's a particular cooper that I love for that vineyard, mostly Sylvain, maybe a little bit of Taranto. Tomahawk, I actually, because it's got such power, I tone down the amount of new oak, so it gets about 70% new oak. And that bright fruit I sort of love paired with barrels more like Ramones, and there's some other barrels, Boots. I love the red fruit, so I'd like that red fruit to kind of sing through. So that's been kind of a life's journey, figuring out, what barrels match each block best. So they are different. That is a difference. Great question.
Jackie is asking, fact or myth, do root versus fruit days matter when planning on opening an older wine?
So that's the biodynamic calendar. Yeah, right, root, leaf, fruit days. Jackie, I have to say I haven't really paid attention. I do often look at the biodynamic calendar during harvest, just out of curiosity, although I don't, we don't really live by those practices. And when you think about biodynamics, it's about the effects of the moon and all of the planets, and it implies that interconnectedness of all living things. And do I think that's possible? That I think it is, and I think, Jackie, you should experiment and get back to us and let us know what you think.
Craig is drinking the 2013 Omega Point and 2013 Tomahawk because he loved the Ganymede so much. He's out of it, but do you have any notes on the 2013 Omega Point, how that compares to either of these wines?
Yeah, so 13 Omega Point, these are single blocks, so individual blocks. Omega Point is always like a 1 to 3 barrel, maybe 4 barrel blend of some of our best blocks. And as a tradition, I've used a couple of experimental techniques in that. So it's very different, it's very focused. So I do think of that as a blended cab because it's more than one block usually. I use a particular barrel for that wine as well, also Sylvains, but they come from trees that are older, so a little bit more fine grain. So Omega Point is quite extraordinary, pretty rare. And I think, what do you think about that 13? I would love to hear, actually. I haven't had that in a while.
And while they're getting back to us on what they think of the Omega Point, Ryan is asking us to tell him more about the Pegasus plot, which you may have mentioned earlier.
The Merlot, yeah. So that's Merlot. That's our Merlot at the very southeast corner of the property. I love that block of Merlot. It's They're older vines, they're close to 30 years old, a lot of power in that Merlot, and that our estate Merlot that we release comes half from that block and half from our hillside block. So it's a great block of Merlot.
George is asking about the production life of a vine. He said you mentioned that Ganymede vines were 30 years old, so what's the typical?
Yeah, so grapevines can live a really long life. They can live to be 200 years old. They're really hard to kill, as a good friend of mine who's a viticulturalist says. What does change over the course of a grapevine's life is its productivity. But I think depending on the site and climate and all of those things, when a vine reaches balance, it can be productive for a really good time. So our oldest vines are close to 30 years old, and a lot of producer will say, okay, once a vine's 25 years old, we'll maybe replant a small portion of that block and start to replace them. But I think that as long as your vines are healthy and you don't have any viruses and they don't start to produce less than is acceptable, and these grapevines, these old vines are producing good yields, not massive yields. They come into balance, so they do naturally produce a little bit less, but there's there's nothing better than the quality of an older vine. So I would say you watch your disease pressure and you watch your productivity, and you make decisions for the long term based on how your site is behaving. So.
A follow-up question, Jody asks, what are our oldest vines?
Our oldest vines are about 30 years old, actually. Yeah. So half of the property is close to 30 years of age, the first part of the golf course that was developed, and then the other half is about 20 years, so, which is pretty old for grapevines.
A question from Michael on the Kezu on what blocks go into that wine.
But that is a secret I cannot disclose. So Kezu is a wine that's designed to go into Magnum. And every year it varies. It has been, I know I've used some White Pebble and Tomahawk, I've used a little bit of Ganymede, but it's a blend of some of our best blocks, picking out kind of, I would say I go for really sort of more muscular lots and something that needs a little bit more time, and something that you'd be willing to age, because people tend to age their Magnums a little bit longer. So yeah, I can't tell you all my secrets, but just know it's really good stuff. Well, Thirsty Thursday has come to an end. I hope this has been sort of a meditative respite from sheltering in place for you guys. I want to take the opportunity to raise a glass to Mother's Day. I want to say happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. A special one to my mom, who I won't get to see this year. Mama, I love you. Thank you for always supporting me. And another special shout out to Jojo Trelato, Debbie Trelato, and Diana Trelato, and little Jojo Trelato, who are all moms. So happy Mother's Day, everyone. I will see you guys in 2 weeks for our next Thursday meditation with wine. Cheers.